Welcome to the Skiffy and Fanty Show.
The Freedom Guard is the code name for Letheria's daring and highly trained Special Mission Force. Their mission, to defend the revolution against pretty much everyone.
I'm Shaun.
And I'm Steven.
And today we are joined by comics writer Aubrey Sitterson. Welcome.
Thanks, man. Wow, what an intro. That's it. What else do I need to say? Steven sold it. Steven sold it for me already. We can go back to talking about baseball now, I think, right?
Yeah. I'm for it.
Well, for those who don't know who Aubrey is the writer of the successfully crowdfunded Beef Bros and Stone Master, the fantasy romance Savage Hearts, the science fiction detective story The Worst Dudes, multiple volumes of the Fight Comics soap opera. That is a lot of words, I just want to say. Fight Comics soap opera, No One Left to Fight. That is a lot of descriptive terms. I like it. And the only comprehensive history of the one true sport, the comic book story of professional wrestling. But we are here today to specifically talk about this beauty right here, which is called Free Planet, which we're up to issue 9 on my end, although I don't think we're going to talk about all the way up to 9.
Bro, issue 10 came out last week. So we're monthly comics, baby. That's the thing. They just keep coming out. That's the thing.
Love it.
And the great news is, by the time this goes out, you will have so many issues to read, and so you better read them. Many. Yeah.
You got a lot of homework to do.
That's right. A lot of homework.
But before we get into our discussion, a reminder to our listeners to please share your questions and comments with us at skiffyandfanty.com/listener suggestions. If you aren't already, join us on Twitch for Shaun's Alphabet streams most every Friday at 7 p.m. Central to be a part of our interactive live streaming show format. Finally, be sure to review and spread the word about our show. Help support us through our Patreon and be part of our Torture Cinema polls, live watches, or other special Patreon-only events on Discord. A mere $1 US a month gives you all that power.
It's a lot. All right, so big question to kind of start us off, Aubrey. What is Free Planet?
Oh, so you need more than what Steven gave you all already? Free Planet is a geopolitical space opera, right? And so what I mean by that is that we tick off all the boxes that you would expect, and I think Skiffy and Fanty listeners know what to expect from a space opera. But in addition to that, in addition to the lasers and the space battles and the interpersonal drama, there's a lot of that. In addition to that, there is this focus on geopolitical concerns, and that's not exactly accurate geopolitical because it's broader than that. But I couldn't think of a term that didn't sound goofy when I said it, like cosmopolitical or like none of those sounded right to me, so I just stuck with geopolitical. But it is about the complex political interactions between societies and governments across the universe. And there is a existing universal order that has been upended, and we attempt to use this setup and the space opera genre to dig down and explore a really central question, which is, what is freedom? What is freedom? What does freedom consist of? What are we willing to sacrifice for it? What kind of discipline does it require? What kind of authority is absolutely necessary? And to do so in our attempt, what our aspiration was to do this in a way that what I see as this literary, to use a literary approach to exploring these things, and it's not solely through the quantity of words, although there are a lot of words in it. It's a comic book for readers. And that is part of it, because that is part of the comics medium. But more broadly than that, our attempt was to achieve that literary complexity through what only the comic book medium can do, right? Rather than mirroring the techniques of novels, rather than mirroring the techniques of televisions and movies, really, kind of reverse engineer it and think, okay, well, how does literature, like what quantifies literature, right? What constitutes literature? And then we're kind of reverse engineer, how do we achieve that doing through the actual strengths that comics has, as opposed to kind of like fighting against the constraints that come with this very unique medium.
This leads me to like my first big question, because the way this is written, the way the story is being told to us is like a history, essentially, right? It is told through sort of vignettes of moments that we get to sort of see visually with dialogue and those things, but then many, many different parts of world building that are happening that are both political, economic. There's elements where we're sort of learning about factions and these different cultures and the elements of them. And it led me to want to ask you about sort of your approach to building this world, and the sort of difficulty with doing that in a medium where you are actually somewhat limited by the amount of words you can actually put in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I'm thrilled to hear you talk about it. Honestly, and I felt the same way reading Steven's review. It overjoyed me, not just that y'all like it, but the manner in which you're engaging with it and what you're picking up on. Because, this was what you're describing is central to the approach, and it's something we thought about constantly. And I'll give you a little backstory on it. So there's a ton of words. There are a ton of words. Can I show it to people?
Sure.
You can see just all the white spaces, all the ones. This is from the first issue, right? There are a ton of words. There's graphs and charts, right? There's a ton going on every big spread, and they're designed around spreads. It's designed to be an art object. Do not buy it digitally. You will hate it. Like you can look at the Goodreads. You can look at our Goodreads reviews. All the people who read it digitally and did not have a good time with it. It's meant to be studied and pored over. I had my previous work. I've always taken a really art forward approach to writing comics, because I believe firmly that comics need to function as art objects, right? That's above all else, right? I'll read a beautifully drawn and well executed comic, but that's written horribly every day of the week, right? I won't do the opposite. I won't read a well written comic drawn poorly because I don't see the point of it, right? So beautiful, exquisite comics that put the strengths of the artists on display have always been my priority. And in keeping with that, I used to write really light, and you might not believe it looking at Free Planet, but I went really, really light on dialogue. I wanted stuff to feel breezy. I wanted people to really focus on the art and use dialogue primarily just to slow people down in spots, right? And to kind of just do like the bare minimum of what's essential to keep the story moving, right? And that was always my thinking. I didn't like the ping pong dialogue. I didn't like the narrative captions are often used as either inner monologue or narration, direct narration, right? Like the classic bad example is there's a panel of a dark, stormy night in the city, and then the caption reads, "It was a dark, stormy night in the city," right? Like that's an exaggerated bad example, but you don't what you often see on the page isn't terribly far off from that, especially in terms of how it's being deployed. And so that was the first big thing for me to figure out. I wanted to do something smarter. I wanted to do something more challenging. I wanted to do something richer. I realized that as much as I love the comics I was making, they weren't the types of comics that I wanted to be reading. They weren't the types of comics that I wanted to see. They weren't the types of things that really stuck in my brain when I listed like really foundational important comics for me. And so that became the big question, like how do I use these narrative captions, right? How do I use these in a way that it's interesting to me? And what I landed on is what you described. They're not narration at all. They're not inner monologue from anybody. They're excerpts from a future history from a in-world historian who also writes the essays at the end of every issue about different aspects, tying in and seeding and setting up. That became the formal conceit, right? That there are, two intertwining threads, right? It turned into a dance show. There's two intertwining threads that are kind of woven together, right? Which are the vignettes you're talking about, which is all the space opera, right? Inclusive of soap opera, but also big like military sci-fi action. And then there is this future history. And it was really important to me that those two things interact with one another in a complex way, that it not be merely just describing what you're seeing on the page. Sometimes it is, but it's not always exactly aligned, and sometimes there's discrepancies between what you're seeing and what you're being told. And like that to me became the goal. Every time I was building out one of these pages, figuring out how to have all these things represented, right? You have all this space that you can use for whatever you want. Like how to give the reader all of these distinct pieces, right? Close-ups and wide shots and graphs and captions and dialogue, and such that once they've looked at all of it in maybe an order of their choosing, maybe hopping back and looking at things again, right, with added context and in a new light, they are then free to infer whatever the hell they want, right? Because to me, that was like the big thing I wanted. Like, if I had to name, like, in my quest for literary comics, for me, what constitutes literature, right, as opposed to just any novel, right? Like, if we're gonna draw a distinction, right, between a literary work, right, whether it's genre or not, for me, what it comes down to is ambiguity, right? It's not a morality play. It's not a direct metaphor. It is something you need to chew on. It's not propaganda. It's more complex than that. And for me personally, if I rattle off my favorite novels, like the best novels, right, the stuff that sticks with me, right, again, genre or not, that's what they all have in common. And so then that became the goal of using this kind of like bifurcated but interwoven approach to spur that kind of ambiguity and complexity in our audience's brains.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So it's
I told you, you put a coin in me and I'll go. You got to raise me in, man. I'll do this all night if you let me.
So it's really interesting that you touched on all those elements of your definition of both literature and literary comics, but the way you also are sort of really exploring the bounds of what can be done in the comics medium by bringing all these elements together. I was, and this was a bit coincidental actually, I was flipping through my copy of Understanding Comics the other day.
Oh, cool.
And
I got it on the shelf back here.
Right?
Yeah.
My shelf is not behind me; it's in front of me, but same. And it actually occurred to me as you were speaking that you and the artist Jed Dougherty, who's fantastic, and
I'll correct you, Stephen. He's my co-creator. He's an essential component of this too.
Co-creator and artist.
Yeah. And I make a point of correcting you because there's a long, nasty history in comics of writers running their stupid mouths and taking up too much of the oxygen from their co-creators, who are the ones who make it possible.
Agreed. Very much true. And thank you for saying that, because I really do agree with you that artists have gotten we went from it being a medium where artists were celebrated at the expense of writers to an almost full pivot in the other direction. And it's really good to see both creators, it being very clear that both creators are working together and bringing their various strengths and are both responsible for the what we see on the page. So thank you for that.
Yeah, man.
What I was getting at is that the two of you are doing something that really, in ways that I don't often see, and in fact, I'm not sure I've seen it in a long time, if ever. You're really fulfilling sort of the McCloudian promise of what comics can do by bringing in all these elements of visual information and juxtaposition. I mean, the McCloud's definition of comics is juxtaposed pictorial and other images in deliberate sequence. And you are really doing interesting things by bringing in so many disparate but intimately connected elements and bringing them together. So what I was wondering, and you've touched on this to a degree, you've talked about your ideas of literature. Is there a theory of comics that you're explicating? Because in the oh, there we go. In the in-universe introduction by Dr. Aldous Fayrouchi, the in-universe historian who's writing frames the story, it is almost a manifesto of comics right there in that brief introduction. So let's talk a little bit about your theory of comics and how it's being used in this work.
Well, buckle the fuck up, gentlemen. You asked for it.
I did.
Yeah, no. So first of all, thank you. Any kind of comparison or reference to Scott McCloud is high praise. Those books were formative to my understanding of and thinking about comics, alongside Will Eisner's pair of books about comics. One of them's, I don't know what they're called. He's Will Eisner. You can look them up.
Large, and I don't remember the other one.
Yeah, there's another one too. But the Will Eisner books, those are great too. And How to Draw a Marvel Way. I think those three things are like the best way to understand how comics work, I think, and together, right? Because they do very different things. So a few things. One, first of all, thank you. I did that one already. Second of all, once again, using the comics medium was central to the approach, right? It was a central concern of both Jed and myself, and using it to achieve this complexity, right? Not by mirroring other techniques, but leaning into what comics can do, right? And I kind of have a little bit of not a beef, but I disagree with Scott McCloud's definition of comics. I think it's too limiting, right? And I think he even acknowledges this, right, in his discussion of it, right? Because as soon as you start talking about sequential images, right, you leave out Family Circus, you leave out Far Side, right? Like you leave out Heathcliff, right? Marmaduke, all the classics, right? But like, you get my point. You leave out these things that are clearly comics. Clearly they're comics, right? And you cease being able to claim cave drawings as comics, which I know a lot of people like to do, or like, wood print images, of that tell kind of narratives. So I find it insufficient, but I think useful in terms of talking about the specific types of comics that Scott McCloud is kind of gravitating into over the course of those three books. Because the course of those three books, and I think the last one is even called Reinventing Comics, and it's largely about webcomics, if I remember. I read it when it came out. It's been many years. But I think it's largely about webcomics. And, that was where he's a futurist, right? He's a guy who's looking ahead and wanting to discover what's next. And everybody was very excited about webcomics, and they still are. They're huge, right? But to my mind, they're not comics. They don't operate. They're something different. They operate in a fundamentally different way, right? Jed and myself both. We're both acolytes of the great Howard Chaykin. We adore him. We're adopted nephews of his. I was a huge Chaykin fan, and when I was an editor at Marvel, as soon as I had the opportunity, I worked with him every chance I could, and he became a very important part of my life. And meanwhile, I met Jed through Howard because he was working as one of Howard's assistants. Howard ran a studio, so he was fully educated under the stern tutelage of Howard Victor Chaykin, right? And Howard's an important figure. I'm not going to do a lecture on that. Y'all have your audience has Wikipedia. They can figure that out on their own. Just take my word for it. He's very, very important. And one of the things that he harps on a lot is that comics, the fundamental storytelling unit of comics is not the panel. This is the disagreement with Scott McCloud, right? It's not the panel. The fundamental storytelling unit of comics is the page. Comics is the presentation of a page and meaning and meaning through the use of some combination of images and text as part of a larger design. That's it, right? Comics is design. Comics is the art of design. And then what we think about as comics are specific idiosyncrasies and visual shortcuts like word balloons and stuff that we establish in order to use design to communicate to people, right? So if you go along with this level, this type of thinking, all of a sudden you're kind of looking askance at webcomics, right? Because there's no page, right? You're looking askance at digital comics, right? Because you're zooming in, you're not able to appreciate the full thing. And that's exactly why something like this doesn't work in digital comics. Because appreciating this isn't a matter of reading individual images sequentially, right? Appreciating this is a matter of reading comics the way that human beings, by virtue of how our anatomy functions, actually read things, right? There's this idea in comics that, people turn the page and they immediately go to the top left, and then they read left to right, and then down, right? So first of all, we know from cultures that read right to left that that's not baked into us. Second of all, they've done extensive cognition testing, right? Eye tracking movements. Even when people are reading prose, I'm not even talking about comics. As soon as you turn the page, your eyes ping pong all over the place. You can't help it, right? It's just what we do. It's something new, and we need to take it all in order to build the context for the small part that we're going to focus at. What that means practically for reading comics is that every time you turn the page, that is what people are appreciating. And that's why Free Planet is built around spreads, right? And it goes hand in hand, that view of comics as design goes hand in hand with the use of all these other elements, right? Charts, graphs, maps, infographics, charts and diagrams and shit all over this thing. And that dovetailed, that kind of realization of, and a desire to flex and a desire to, once again, complexity, depth, right? Like you said it in your review, a surfeit of visual information, right? That was the goal. That was the point. This is not a book to read slowly. This is something we're going to pack it in. This is something that you're going to want to study, and it's rewarding to you if you go back and look at stuff, right? And that was central to the approach, and something we built around and dovetailed really nicely with other reading that I'd been doing of Edward Tufte. Do you know Edward Tufte?
No.
He wrote this. He wrote a great series. He's like a data scientist and like graphic designer type guy, and he wrote this great series of books. And the first one is called "The Visual Display of Quantitative Design." And he talks a little bit about the history of like graphs and charts and infographics, but he also establishes principles and rules for how this stuff works best. And he does it kind of from first principles, just about like, okay, so what is the goal here to you? And it's fascinating because he's talking about comics. And he would never admit it. And he doesn't say anything about comics. But the way he talks about these graphs and charts and how to use color and how to set things apart and how much data a person can reasonably absorb at a single time, like it's comics. It's 100% comics. And so that was a huge influence on it too.
Oh, there's 1,000 things.
Have you read Dylan Horrocks?
No, I don't know who that is. I'm gonna hold on.
Oh, he's a New Zealand comics creator.
Yes, HORROCKS, right?
HORROCKS, and
yes.
Best known for he did a run on Books of Magic, but he's best known for Hicksville, which is one of my favorite graphic novels of all time, and a related book that's not a direct sequel called Sam Zabel and the Magic Pen, both of which are great. But he has a theory of comics that is also distinct from the McCloudian, and that I was thinking about a lot as you were speaking. He says comics are maps, which I think is beautifully succinct and really sort of establishes this idea. You know, a comic depicts a whole range of space and time, and that's exactly what you were talking about, right? That there's this.
That's better. That's better than mine. It's much shorter. I'm gonna start using that in the future.
Yeah. He got into this in an old Comics Journal interview, which you can look up if you want.
I should. Yeah, man. No, that's great. You know, and I think comics are maps. That's brilliant. It's really, really good. And I think it speaks. So what you're talking about is, again, this is really useful and interesting and distinct about comics, that you present to people all of this information. You know, in any type of storytelling, my theory is that what is most, you know, people talk about show don't tell, and I find it irritating because you have to tell people things. What are you talking about, right? Like, you're using prose. You have, and like, it's not a question of whether you tell people things definitively or not, right? It's not even a question of like implying things to people. I think it goes deeper than that. For like real complexity, right? To really give readers something that they want to chew on, you have to be even more oblique than just implying. You have to give them pieces such that they can infer, right? And I think this is true of all storytelling. But what's really interesting about comics, and so this is a McCloud thing, the magic's in the gutters. Right?
Yeah.
The magic is in the stuff that you don't draw, the stuff that the reader has to imagine in their brain. The sequential panels is a piece of that, right? It's one way to use what we're talking about, right? To allow people to give two panels, and then the human brain will figure out what goes in between, right? That's one way to use this like choose your own adventure map approach to a medium, right? But another one is to treat it more like a map. And there's no right order in which to read a map. You look at a map in any damn order you please, right? And maybe there's some things to guide you around, but it's a map. And then what do you get when you're done looking at the map? An understanding of the area depicted, right? That you've pieced together from whatever you've observed. And that's what we're trying to do with Free Planet, right? Approach every single spread with that mindset of saying, okay, so can I show you something?
Please.
For every issue, here's what I do. So I start, like, I have an outline. This is from issue 13. I have like an outline, like written on the computer with like beats, like kind of like scenes and like just important, like functional stuff that needs to happen to keep everything moving. Then I do a pass, kind of like broadly speaking, page by page of like what needs to happen. I make sure I can fit it within 20 pages for each issue, right? Then I do that again with even crazier small writing, and try to really drill down into kind of specific ways of presenting this information and kind of further narrowing down in on what actually needs to take place, like what actions we need to see happen. And then the really difficult part, I do thumbnails.
Interesting.
I do thumbnails. I do thumbnails before I script. And it's at that stage that I ask myself for every single spread, okay, what needs to happen? What do we need the reader to take away here? What does the reader need to think? And what is the most visually spectacular way to provide this to them, right? Knowing that we have in our back pocket this future history that adds additional complexity and understanding and context into whatever it is that you're observing.
Nice.
Ooh.
Interesting.
Very. So I want to hone in on something kind of specific that you do. You've mentioned the spreads, and there are quite a number of them. And I did think it was interesting you mentioned that, you know, for some of these spreads, you could quite literally read them in almost any order if you wanted to. You could start anywhere you really wanted. But there are also some interesting visual choices made in several of the issues where the way you have to interact with the page means you have to turn it and move it around. There's one in I think issue 8 maybe, which is like literally a spiral, and it keeps spiraling, and you have to keep going. It's so cool. I really like that. But there are others that just like quite literally the page, like each new page is like turning it and turning it and turning it.
The dog fight in issue 3. You got a barrel roll with the action. Yeah, man.
That interaction, I'm sure someone's done it, but it was so novel for me at that moment. It made me interact really differently, and I'm kind of curious about your thought process, working with Jed and the artists, about like designing those moments where we really do have to completely change how we interact with the medium.
Yeah, so there are antecedents. Is that the right word? There are people who did it earlier. Antecedents? Yeah? Have I get nods? Okay, look what I have next to me. Because I got both of them. This is N through Z, my OED. So there are antecedents, right? The one that people point to a lot is during Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Batman run in the aughts. There was a really memorable scene that spun around. My touchstone for it, however, comes from Cerebus by Dave Smith.
Yeah.
Yeah, like when Cerebus, I think it's when he falls off the tower. I went back and reread it, and I'm actually kind of in the midst. But dude, you can see my Cerebus volumes down there too.
I can.
There they are. They're unmistakable. I'm in the midst of a reread of that too, and he uses it quite a bit. Like this, whether to do a full spin or just kind of like sometimes for different reasons. So Dave Sim is a creator that is a very influential creator on me. Because I think he talking about the rare examples in which people achieve literary complexity in comics through the medium, not despite the medium. I think Dave Sim is near the top of the list, quite frankly. And so he was a big influence, and I found myself wondering, and I kind of like, so I knew it was something I wanted to do, right? Like Free Planet is, again, designed from jump to be kind of a flex for Jed and I both, just to show what we can do and what comics can do, right? And I knew that I wanted to do the spinning book gimmick. And then once I landed on dogfight, a space dogfight, that's perfect. And I found myself wondering, why don't people do this all the time? This is such a cool thing. This is and again, it's something that like you want to own this. To be like the single issue, to be able to like spin around because it's more fun and easy that way. And I was wondering, why don't people do this more often? And then I started working on it, and I found out why people don't do it more often. It's fucking hard. It's a headache. It's a huge headache, man. And so yeah, like I whenever I want to do something outre like that, I always run it by Jed first because we're co-creators, and both because I don't want to ask him to do something he's going to hate me for, but also because I need him to weigh in on whether these things are going to work, right? And we, from my end, it was a difficult scene to write because of choices I made for myself. Because again, there's multiple kind of narrative threads running through that big fight scene on top of the spinning thing going on. And it was just a lot for me to juggle. For Jed, it became really, really difficult because there's just all these kind of unknowns of once you draw the spaceship, is the angle of the spaceship working against what people need to be doing with their eye line, and is that an unreasonable? Oh no, do we need to are we then asking people to go to read right from left in order to go back and read? So there are all these little things that came up within laying it out that were a nightmare for Jed, and then I was legitimately worried that our letterer Taylor Esposito was going to quit on us because we kept on going back to him this looks really good, but if you could just tilt this caption by 8 degrees. Just a smidge, right? There was a whole lot of that to make sure that it read perfectly because it was an important beat for us.
So I'd like to get back to the story a little bit because I think we've talked a lot about the visuals, and I don't want people to come away with the impression that Free Planet is primarily a formal exercise, because there's a lot of interesting and innovative stuff being done, but it's not primarily a formal exercise, right? I'm not going to say what it is primarily, that's for you to say, but it is very much a story about a group of people, a group of flawed, bickering people, many of whom hate each other, who nonetheless have to work together to preserve the freedom of this newly liberated planet. And you've drawn on a great deal of research. You included that reading list in the back of the first volume, which I loved. Love a reading list.
That's Dr. Foyrushi's recommended reading.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Foyrushi's recommended reading list.
That's right. It's my bibliography. Probably obviously, that's my bibliography.
Yes, you did a lot of reading in real world revolutions and even revolutionary theory, anarchist theory, anarchism, and so that's all of which is really fascinating to me. And what I was wondering is, what role did this research play in shaping the story? Were there elements of the story that you were considering at one point and then reevaluated when you did some research and went, oh, that isn't actually how that works? People don't do that in revolutions, or that's been done, but everyone gets killed, or whatever.
That's so interesting. Nothing springs to mind immediately of stuff that my research made me rethink. The broad strokes, the broad strokes of this thing, like, it's not, especially given current events. So Free Planet was originally ideated as space G.I. Joe sci-fi G.I. Joe defending space Venezuela. Right? Like, that was the start of this thing. Newly independent country trying to stake out a place for itself separate from the existing world order, its independence safeguarded and fueled by a unique fuel, a potent fuel source that makes them a target for everybody else, right? So it's this double-edged sword. And there are a lot of examples to pull from in history, right? There's Venezuela, there's Cuba, of course, right? And then for me, probably the biggest single historical influence on Free Planet was the Spanish Civil War. And I fell in love with reading history during the pandemic, largely because I needed a hobby that would keep me off the internet. And I'd always been a voracious reader, but I'd always read prose. I just never had really a desire to read nonfiction before. And I kind of identified that as a deficiency in my literary diet and worked to change it. I had some friends I asked for some recommendations to get me started, and then I just started kind of reading whatever interested me at the time. And I started reading the Spanish Civil War by I have it here because it's important. The Spanish Civil War by Hugh Thomas. It's this thick. It's obnoxious. Oh my God. Yeah, this one looks pristine because I read it I had checked it out from the library twice before I ended up buying my own. That was really important to me, and that was the starting point, because the reason I started reading about the Spanish Civil War was because I think about the Spanish Civil War as being the last time that there were other options for societal organization on the table beyond liberal technocracy and authoritarianism. Right? And those are the two choices. Those are the two existing systems now. But with the Spanish Civil War, that wasn't the case. There were a vast number of views on how society should be organized at work and fighting with each other during that conflict. And Hugh Thomas's book, The Spanish Civil War, I've since read criticism of it, particularly from Murray Bookchin, right? So I can't co-sign everything in Hugh Thomas's book, but what was great about it is it was expansive and it covers everything. And so it gave me a pretty robust view of kind of post-revolutionary isn't exactly right, but society's in a revolutionary flux, right? And it touches on a lot of those. So, I was fortunate in that was a starting place. So I didn't really come across anything that I had to completely change. But I will say that, again, getting back to this number, right? The two things the two threads that I put together to make Free Planet, right? Which is all the geopolitical stuff with the space opera. Like, that was a real challenge. Figuring out, knowing that, okay, I need these kind of space opera beats, and I need these emotional beats and these character beats and relationships and stuff like that. But it's not enough to just have this stuff happening concurrently. It needs to be impacted by what's going on in the broader world. It needs to be rooted in that, and to that end, are y'all, do you want me to just keep talking, or do you have another question?
Go for it. Yeah, no, go for
talking.
it.
Okay.
I'll have a follow-up, don't worry.
Are y'all all just Huxley fans?
A little bit.
I mean, yeah.
Okay. So I huge Aldous Huxley fan. He was my favorite writer when I was in high school. And one of my favorite books of his is Point Counterpoint. Probably my favorite, Point Counterpoint. And it's like a British society novel, and it's all of these people, and they're all insufferable, and they all have ardently held opinions about everything, and they bicker with one another and have these kind of emotional and relationship entanglements amid disagreements about huge ideas that actually inform and sometimes undercut the kind of soap opera arguments that they're having. It's beautiful. It's really, really exquisite and intricate in the way it's all connected together. And I wanted, to me, that's apex literature, right? Just this complicated thing with this ensemble cast, and you have to piece together what it means, and you have to find meaning in this thing, and you chew on it. I think about it all the time. I think about that novel all the time for exactly that reason, just these specific little beats. And I wanted that complexity, and I knew that it needed to be rooted in this revolutionary theory and historical research and stuff like that. But it also needed to be kind of visceral human character stuff, right? And so I have extensive dossier as part of my big massive trove of documents keeping track of all this bullshit. I have dossiers for all of our cast, including a paragraph on their sentiment toward every other person on the Freedom Guard, what they agree about, what they disagree about, and how they and I tried not to key them to specific ideologies that we would recognize too closely, because I didn't, that's the whole reason we're doing this fiction, right? It's the reason it's not set in the Spanish Civil War is because I don't want to be beholden to anything. I want to be able to kind of do my own thing and have freedom to do that. But I did. I wrote a ton about who these people are and their philosophical worldviews and their views on religion and economic views and what they think about each other and each other's views. And I did this as a separate exercise before I started in on the really, really intricate plotting of things, in order that I could pull something from history, right? Whether it's the Spanish Civil War, or the history of Cuba, or the Chinese Revolution, the Chinese Civil War, right? Russian Revolution, whatever it was that I was going to pull from these things, I was going to insert into Lutheria as it's trying to establish itself. I could then go to the dossiers, and I would already know how each of these people would feel about this thing that's going to happen. And if I didn't know, I could at least figure it out, right, from what I'd established for them.
This is very interesting, because one of the characters that you're making me think of and that I would love us to talk about is Jackson Crater.
He's my favorite.
Oh, great. So then it'll be easy for me to get you to talk about him. Because one of the things that stood out to me in this is, there's this very familiar idea of like, let's bring in the guy who has methods other people disagree with for how you fight for liberation, right? Because he's described by many people as a terrorist because he's killed civilians and he's blown up civilian sites and so on and so forth, right? Very familiar figure that I think we could all look at in the real world. But then you stick him in this team who have very different ideologies about what liberation's meant to look like, what we're liberating, what are we ultimately trying to get to. And you have to figure out, these people have to figure out how do we actually work together in this team together with a person who will occasionally want to do things that we fundamentally disagree with and cannot reconcile with our own moral framework. And so I kind of wanted you to talk about that aspect of this story. It's not just about Jackson Crater, really. It's kind of about many of the characters, about their dealing with trying to sort of uphold this liberation movement, this idea that we need to maintain this thing while dealing with the fact that when you put a bunch of people together, they do not all share the same ideologies, and those will sometimes violently oppose one another.
Yeah, so I'm thrilled with this line of questioning because Jackson Crater is my favorite, right? He's the wild card, right? He's Wolverine. Yeah. He shows up. He's little and he's violent and he's like unhinged and you don't really know what to expect from him. But he's also badass, bro. Like he's really cool. And he's also not wrong. He's not wrong about anything, right? And another key component I think of Jackson Crater is that he comes from a wildly different place than every other person on the team. Like he comes from a literal different planet. And I don't want to like belabor too much the specifics of it, but his worldview, like everyone's, is crucially informed by his background and where he comes from and the experiences that he's had. And that was really important to me. And I think that Jackson Crater's arrival in issue 2, right? It is emblematic, and it's one of the. It's something. It is an instance that I'm particularly proud of something that we've tried to do throughout the series. Right, a friend of mine, Daniel Friedman, who's a brilliant comic book writer. He's been following along with Free Planet like since before it came out. I've been showing him stuff, and he asked me really early on. He's like, "Are you gonna tell people what the answer is? Are you gonna have a view on how society should be structured?" Because it's a book about world building in both senses of the word, right? It's intricate, rigorous world building, but it's also about trying to build a new world, right? And I said, no, of course not. Of course I'm not going to tell people like that's antithetical to the project, right? Because it's not what it's about. Free Planet, because if Free Planet was about telling people how a society should be structured, it would just be propaganda or maybe direct metaphor, and we've got enough of that, right? I've done work like that before, and I don't think it's literary, right? I don't think it. If a definitive worldview like that can be extrapolated from a piece of work, it's not complex enough. That's how I feel, and yeah. I don't know. Maybe I'll have to back down from that later. I've never said that in public before, but we'll see.
I'm fascinated by it, though.
Yeah, I don't know. Test it. Maybe it'll hold up. I don't know. But for now, to me, keeping that question alive and ruminating on it and giving people stuff to chew on, like that's the meat of Free Planet. And to achieve that, I think it's important that we constantly be stepping back. We constantly step back, right? And what I mean by that is that, so we start off and we're like, okay, so who's the good guy here, right? Because it's comics, right? And it works in a superhero adjacent mode, right? So it's easy in the way the Freedom Guard is presented. They're a superhero team, right? And so of course, but then they start bickering. You're like, oh wait, they don't all think the same thing. So which one is right? I endeavor to make sure that we are constantly undercutting all of the characters. That all of the characters are wrong, that all of them are missing something, that all of them fail to view things from where the person they're arguing with is coming from. And that happens in the micro, but also the macro, right? Such that every single villain or anti-hero or whatever you want to call them in Free Planet doesn't just get humanized, and maybe they don't even get humanized, but they get their worldview gets explained. And it's I take pains to make sure that none of it seems arbitrary. Because I think, again, that's where the meat is. That's what you want to chew on.
This goes back to something you were saying earlier about ambiguity, right? I hadn't really thought of that as something that made a work literary, but it is something that I think makes art in general very interesting, which is, sometimes not having the answer, and we have to sort of figure that out from what we're reading or putting into our eyes or ears or whatever. And you're talking here about bringing that into these characters and sort of having the characters undercut each other, or be undercut as the story progresses, where like they're sometimes wrong and they're sometimes right, and they make mistakes and these kinds of things, which is also just kind of very human, not painting sort of very simplistic characters. There's also an aspect of this that I think is this story I think you're kind of talking about it, is like this story is like guiding us through a very political situation and sociological, etc., where there may not actually be answers that are ones that are definable. You have to come to an answer on your own, knowing that answer will be partly wrong, because no answer is perfect. And you made me think a lot about Le Guin, who writes a novel called The Dispossessed, which is called A Critical Utopia. You know it. Okay, for folks that don't know, so the short version...
I'll let you describe, but I want to say this first before you do the description. Yeah. Along with this Hugh Thomas Fair Civil War book, I sent The Dispossessed and The Dawn of Everything by Graeber and Waingro to Jed once Free Planet got picked up by Image. I was like, here it is. Here's your reading list before we get going. But I'm sorry. Explain what it is. It's important.
Yeah, so like the short version of The Dispossessed is called A Critical Utopia for a reason, because you have these two...
Utopia.
Yeah, an ambiguous utopia, excuse me. Academics will say the critical utopia idea. You have these two worlds, basically like mirror worlds, but they have very different conditions. And so you have one that's like a very difficult, hard world to live on. It's very arid. That society that is built there has built the best possible society they can with the conditions they have available to them, the environment that they have, right? Is it a society I want to live in? Not particularly. It sounds really difficult, but that's what the conditions have given to them. The opposite world is much more like ours, and it has all the problems you'd expect of a world with abundance, hypercapitalism, misogyny, slavery, all kinds of issues, all up and down, because there's all of this abundance, and look what it does to us. It has the opposite effect. And so I raised that here because in a lot of ways, this book is doing some very similar things. Like I think of the Aurorans as an example, who literally you have a character at one point in, I can't remember what issue now, who's been captured. I won't tell you anything more. And he sits down and he explains basically why his way of life is like an ideal way of life. And when he explains it, you're like, oh yeah, like I kind of get it. Like, I get why you think that. Because from your view, it makes sense, right? Yeah. Do I want to live there? No. Because they're in school way too darn much, and I don't want that.
You're scared of the imperial examinations.
Yes, and I don't want to find out that I'm eligible for the helm and have to wear that. I don't want that. That is way too much.
I will just say that both in my written review and at the start of this conversation, I was this close to describing Free Planet as Ursula Le Guin's G.I. Joe.
Yes!
I'll take it, man. I'll take it. I'll happily take it. So I love that comparison. Ursula Le Guin is very, very important to me. She's one of my favorite authors. And The Dispossessed is my favorite of hers, absolutely. And it was formative in thinking about Free Planet and, how kind of, exactly what you're talking about, right? Like this, trying the best we can to create a better world under conditions of deprivation, right? Mm-hmm. And that was hugely important, but also, again, like the kind of the ambiguity to it and the messiness, right? Because things aren't great on, it's like a moon, I think, where it takes place, right? So It's funny. I told he comes up again because he's very important to me. I told Howard Chaykin. So I showed Howard a very early version of Free Planet because Howard also has a lot of history with space opera specifically in his past, and also I just respect him a lot, and I wanted his seal of approval. Quite frankly, he means a lot to me, and I showed it to him, and he asked me, so he loved it, and I knew he loved it because the first thing he said is, "There's no audience for this. You are overestimating your audience. Nobody." And he was really adamant about it, and which I took as a compliment coming from him, right? And the next thing he asked me was, "What are you reading?" Like what? Like I was like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "Have you are you reading other sci-fi? Like what do you like? What kind of sci-fi have you read?" And I was like, "Well, I really love Ursula Le Guin and Frank Herbert." And he goes, "That's not what you should be reading. I'll tell you what you should be reading. You should be reading Cordwainer Smith."
I wanted to get to Cordwainer Smith.
So I did. I read all of Cordwainer Smith. It's demented. And yeah, like when people, it's demented and it's great, but it's foundational sci-fi, and him as a guy is even more fascinating.
Yes.
It's like, yes. For your listeners, if any of them don't know, Cordwainer Smith is the source point for two really essential components of sci-fi, right? One is the idea of the human diaspora that's spread out across the galaxy, fallen out of touch with one another, and then have been brought back into the fold by some larger hegemony. He created that, right? So Ursula Le Guin, Frank Herbert, that's where they got it. And it's not a knock on them, it's part of the canon, and people develop and they riff and they iterate. It's normal, right? I'm not gonna, they're my favorites, right? But the other really important thing that you came up with that I think will probably be of interest to your audience, I've never seen an earlier version. I challenge people to find one. Sexy space cats.
Yes.
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 Nobody did it earlier. He's the first, right? You don't get Thundercat. You don't get Thundercats without Cordwainer Smith. That's what I'm telling you right now. No, I read Cordwainer, and Cordwainer it is deeply weird, deeply strange stuff. But it is from the point of view of a guy who was an advisor to Chiang Kai-shek and involved with the U.S. State Department as his dad was. Dr. Sun Yat-sen was his godfather. He wrote a manual on psychological warfare that's still used by the CIA. It's nuts. And he also wrote this foundational sci-fi under a fake pen name. But reading that Cordwainer Smith stuff, man, was really helpful. It was like an act of genre archaeology, because I was able to see, like I knew Dune and I knew the Hainish cycle from Ursula Le Guin, but seeing kind of the building blocks that they had pulled from, and then going back and reading more Heinlein as well. Like I reread Starship Troopers, and I read Moon's a Harsh Mistress. That was another really important one, right? It comes at these ideas from a very different libertarian angle, I would say. Right, but again, great stuff. And yeah, no, but Cordwainer, it was in the back of my mind constantly when building out kind of the larger world of Free Planet.
Yeah, it's so funny because I'd heard you mention that in other interviews, and I had not seen it. I didn't see it until you said it, and then I thought to myself, "Oh, now I get it. Now I understand." Because, and I don't want to give the impression that Free Planet is just a collection of homages and references, but I do see the DNA, right? The way you hint that space travel is physically painful and insanity-inducing, at least in some methods. I can see the parallels between Lutheria and Australia, and the Lutherian Revolution and the uprising of the Underpeople in Ballad of Lost Samel and others, and of course realizing that Basil and a scanner would have a lot to talk to each other about.
Sure, yeah, man. No, I mean, it's funny. So you list all these things, and the people so. And the first one you said was space travel as this painful, madness-inducing thing, right? Like faster than light travel. People hear that and they say, "Oh, Warhammer." right? And they say Warhammer. They say Warhammer when they see the Space Marines. Just the same way people are like, oh, it's kind of like Dune, right? Or oh, it's like the Dispossessed. And that's kind of like the fun part of like digging down deep to find these foundational elements, right? Hope like such that you can. I mean, and this is what's great about working in a genre, any genre. That if you are familiar enough with it and you've done the legwork and not just reading things willy-nilly in the genre, but reading foundational elements and figuring out where these things came from and how they've evolved, it gives you the ability to draft off them. Right? Because when people knowing that people will get to page 2 of Free Planet and already have the context of Dune, which is like oddly a weird mainstream thing now, which is insane to think about still to me. But like knowing that people get to page 2 and like have the understanding already given to them by a base level familiarity with Dune, that allows you to move faster. That allows you to, to either deliver on those expectations or, more interestingly, subvert them, right? Or deny them until you deliver them later on, right? It's like I'm a big wrestling guy. And I think about storytelling like professional wrestling a lot, which is maybe seems counterintuitive with like all this high-minded college boy stuff we're talking about. But, if you think about how a wrestling match is structured, you go into it knowing who the guys are, knowing what their finishers are, knowing what their taunts and their signature moves and catchphrases and things. And the art comes from, that's one of them, man. The art comes from how the wrestlers put those pieces together in consideration of what the audience knows and what they want, and more importantly, what they don't know they want, right? And the way you achieve this is by establishing expectations, denying them, subverting them, and then eventually delivering on it, either in the micro with the hero winning the match, or the macro with them winning at the pay-per-view later this month, right? And I think about comics any kind of storytelling in a very similar. I think it's a helpful schema through which to view comic or any kind of storytelling, because it breaks things down to their really fundamental level, which is putting on a fucking show, giving the people what they want. That's what it's about, right? And they don't know. And the people don't know. This is very wrestling talk too, right? The marks, they don't know. The marks don't know what they want. If they knew what they wanted, they wouldn't be marks, right? And I think that's like a nasty way to view your audience, right? When you phrase it like that, but it's a useful and not incorrect point of view, right? Even if people think they want the story they're saying they want, they don't, because they know that already. That's boring. It doesn't give them anything, right? So it becomes the job of somebody wanting to do something complex that riffs off of and delivers on and drafts off of people's expectations and what they already know. You have to be thinking 3 or 4 moves ahead of the reader, inclusive of being familiar with all the stuff that they're going to be, like all the baggage that they're going to be showing up with.
Yeah.
And in this case, I think there's a bunch of different ways you can set that up for readers. Like you could literally describe this as like, G.I. Joes in a revolutionary situation. And then that gives some people tons of like, they have immediate expectations, but then they're going to have like, well, they can't just do G.I. Joe. So what are they doing with these characters? And then you're going to find out real quick, oh, they're not normal G.I. Joes.
There's a lot. There's a lot going on. Yeah. It's more intense. It's meant to be visually overwhelming. It's, and that's by design. And, there are certainly people, if the type of comics that people are used to reading are breezy, the type of things that you can read in 5 minutes, right? Manga that you just blast through 200 pages in an hour, right? Or whatever it is. If that's what you're coming from, this is jarring. It's different. It's a different approach. And I get that. But it was very much a conscious decision, right? I wanted it to feel, I joke that I wanted it to feel a little bit like talking to me, which is exhausting and a little overwhelming. Yeah. Both of those things, right? I want to make it feel like I know my wife feels sometimes when she's had enough, right? But that's part of it. And, looking at the whole page that way. And my hope is, and I don't know, in my opinion, in a theory at least, is that, if this was an approach that was done sequentially in panels, right, with like AirSat storyboards, it would be turgid. It would be brutal. It would be so unpleasant, just slogging left to right, down, like I don't know, like type it on an old-fashioned typewriter, right? It would be brutal. But the hope is that with this approach that centers page design, I can't find it. That would have been a lot better. Page design and thumbnails and how we're using the page. Like, the hope is that it becomes not something to fit, not something to grind through directly, but something to sit with and live in and study and flip back. And, Stephen, you mentioned in your review, like, you found yourself, you kept flipping back to that spread of the characters, right? Because there's a spread, or pages 4 and 5, that introduce most of the core, almost the entirety of the core cast, minus Jackson Crater. He doesn't show up till issue 2. But there's a spread, and there's everybody, full body shots, standing on a stage. There it is.
Yeah.
And big captions with their names in bold, and then some biographical information about who these people are. That's intentional. That was a deliberate choice, right? Such that, like, and some books do this. I read what was it? Like, Dream of the Red Chamber. It's like an ancient Chinese novel, and all of the characters have like 3 different names because they have their given name and then their familial name and then how they style themselves. It's dreadfully confusing, and in the Chinese language, what you call your father's aunt is different. So they're called multiple names by different people. So it's dependent on who's speaking. And so they had to have at the front of this thing for English speakers a family tree and a table showing you everybody's names, and dreadfully complicated. Certainly we're not getting to that point. But thinking like that, like how do we make something that feels like a volume worth spending time with? Right? Mm-hmm. How do we reward people for spending time with it, but make it diegetic, right? Make it part of the actual story, such that it's not an appendix you're going to dig through, because that's not fun. That's work. It's a spread that you remember from a few months ago when you read it, and maybe you'll go dig it out or flip back through into the earlier graphic novel. I think it's the best value in comics, man. It's $4. It's only 20 pages of story. There's 2 pages of essay at the back of each one. It's only 20 pages of story, but it takes you 3 or 4 times longer to read it than any other story, than any other comic. And more if you're actually digging back into these things. We want to give value. We want, like, I think the idea of comics as things that need to be read quickly and thrown away is fun and cool. And I think there's a lot of really interesting stuff you can do with ephemeral comics. But this isn't that. Again, it's comics as literature. It's comics as art object. And that demands an approach that slows people down, that rewards them for study and thinking about things.
If you want a fun version of this that is in this, by the way, like a specifically kind of silly but really interesting one, it's the Alien Ambassador. Because there is a little section which gives you the color-coded, what we approximate in the story to be their emotional states. And that is super important, because it in no way tells you exactly what they're feeling. It gives you approximations of what maybe they possibly are feeling. And there are multiple times when you see the ambassador with different colors on, saying nothing throughout the story in multiple issues. And I found myself literally just holding that page being like, okay, what is this little bastard thinking right now?
I love that. I love it. Good. That's
because I don't want to know.
No, he's our only truly alien character. Everybody else is human. Everybody else is human, or evolved from humans, right? He's truly alien, and we wanted him to feel that way, right? And so we made him a mood ring. He's a walking mood ring, right? But like his race, they're weird, and they have
foreknowledge.
They see in 4 dimensions, right? They see time differently than we do, right? And that impacts what their emotions actually are. because when you can see the entirety of time, you don't necessarily get happy or sad or mad or, you know, like humans do. So yeah, I put a lot of thought into like what kind of like odd blends of emotional states a creature that could see the future might actually have.
I really appreciated that the ambassador said almost right in their first introduction, when they were talking with Talus. Yeah, seeing the future basically makes us dicks. Yeah, it's really easy to be smug and unpleasant when you know what's going to happen.
Yeah,
and, yeah.
No, I'm thrilled that y'all had that reaction to it, because it's a key. His name is Ural Ken. We call it Jed and I call it the Ural key. And yeah, it's something you're meant to refer back to, and it's to provide added value. It's to provide, you know, there's the way that you read the scene, and then if you dig back and figure out how Ural Ken's emotional states are changing, keyed to which pieces of dialogue, maybe there's a new way that you read the scene.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Also, I'll say I really appreciated that you also changed the way that he talks to reflect that foreknowledge as well. He'll say things like
he's not very good with tenses.
Not at all. Yeah. I mean, why would he need it?
Why would you need it? Right? It's really interesting stuff.
Yeah, it's very fun. We unfortunately have to stop, so because we can't do a 2-hour podcast. I mean, I could talk to you for 10 more hours about stuff.
I need to take a break for dinner, though. I gotta carve up if we're gonna keep this going. So
before we fully sign off, depending on when this releases, several other issues of this will have come out. It should come out in a week and a half. So I think 2 issues will have dropped in that time. So folks can get those. But is there anything else that you are working on that you are allowed to tell us about?
Free Planet's the focus, man. Free Planet is a work-intensive project by design. You know, you saw my thumbnails, you heard about the research, which is ongoing. I'm reading.
Sure.
I'll tell you what I'm working on. I'm going to finish this, The Great Game by Peter Hopkirk. The struggle for empire in Central Asia. Between my reading and the approach on Free Planet and actually managing, so it's an image, which means that we own it outright. It's ours. It's the best deal in publishing, but we do everything ourselves. I edit it as well, so that I have to manage the process of getting these things made each month. Free Planet's the focus, and that was by design too. I used to have a bunch of different irons in the fire at all times, just trying to get things going. And I don't think I was doing my best work that way. And so I made a conscious decision to instead do one comic. And that's almost certainly why Free Planet is as overwrought and dense and complex, and frankly, about everything. It's about everything. It's about everything that's interesting to me through the lens of world building.
Excellent. Are you allowed to tell us how many issues you expect this year?
It's on. Well, I mean, it's monthly.
So it's just monthly forever, potentially.
Until the wheels fall off. Yeah, man.
Okay.
So we're hoping,
million issues.
Yeah, I mean, that's the hope, right? I tell folks, I want Free Planet's length to be measured not in issues, but in feet. I want a bookshelf, right, of these things.
Oh my Lord.
It's big and rich and complex, and we could go.
Erebus really did get inside your head.
I think it's the dream of most comic book creators, though, right? Is to have the 300 issue thing. But no, I would love to. You know, it's a question, as always, of sales. There's a trade paperback out right now. It collects issues 1 through 6. Issues 7 through 10 are on the stands. Issue 11 will hit the second Wednesday in April. So there's time and ability to hop on board. Issues 7 and 8 are like a little interlude, like a separate thing. We don't need to get into what it is. But you could do the trade and then pick right up at issue 9 if you wanted to.
Excellent.
You don't need to read issues 7 and 8, although I recommend it because I think they're great and they have a couple of awesome guest artists on them.
Nice.
But yeah, no. So I mean, I sent issue 14 to Jed on Monday. and he just wrapped issue 13 and is launching into it. Yeah, there they are, the expansion protocols arc. And yeah, so it remains to be seen, right? It's always touch and go with comics, right? Because it is a monthly periodical business, and so month to month, we wait for the numbers to come in and we see how we're doing. So, here's my plea, not just for this comic, but all comics. If it's something you like and you want to see more of, buy the single issues. Not just because that's how people fund the continued creation of these ongoing things, but because it's how it's designed to be appreciated, right? Free Planet, every issue of Free Planet, it's a full meal. It's meant to take you a month. It's meant to give you stuff to chew on for a full 30 days before the next one comes out. And I remember what a joy that is, and I still experience it with books that I love, right? Go into the shop to get a book that you're excited about, and you get to read it, and then you get to be excited about the next one. Like, that's a real joy unique to the comic book buying experience. And again, I will harp on this. It's what funds the continued creation of them. So there you go. Get to a comic book shop. Stat.
Oh, you should. I need to start buying comics again. I am presently sitting next to 6 long boxes of comics. So I used to have 12.
Selling comics.
Yeah, I had 12 at one point, and I had to downsize considerably. But I kept a lot of stuff that had personal value, or just stuff that I just really like. And I was like, I'm not selling this. Yeah. Can't take my Scott Snyder Batmans. You can't.
Oh, cool.
No, I don't care how much that number one's worth. You're not getting it. For folks that would like to find you and your work, I mean, obviously Image Comics, if they want to find that, and then go to your local comic shop, and you could certainly find this.
Ask for Free Planet, they can get it. Yeah, bookstores can get the trade. Absolutely, anywhere the books are sold.
Absolutely. And then, but what about you? If they would like to follow your life journey?
Yeah, I'm easy to find on the internet. Aubrey Sitterson is my name on all social media, and there's only one of me. I'm most active on my newsletter, but even that only goes out like once a month. You can go to AtlantisStillSunk.com. That's the newsletter, and it goes out once a month to keep up with upcoming issues and signings and cons and things like that. But I'm on Instagram and Blue Sky and all that stuff too.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Aubrey, for joining us for this episode.
Thank you for having me, brother. This has been great. I really appreciate it. And again, Stephen, thank you for that glowing review you gave us. I was humbled by it. Thank you.
Oh, thank you.
I appreciate it. It's a joy talking to folks who are willing to engage with Free Planet in the way that we had very much hoped that people would. So this was a really treat for me on a Friday night, fellas. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, by the way. This was a lot of fun for me to read, so I had a good time. And I have to tell you guys, the moment I had to do this with the turning the pages, I was like, I'm having fun now. I was really excited for that. I was like, what's going on?
Yeah, no, I'm thrilled to hear that, and that was a big moment for the series too, because I feel like, I don't know, it's too late now. We've been talking for however long we've been talking. We harped so much on the formal stuff and the research that I worry that people might think that the book is slow and staid. It's there's space battles and romance and laser gun fights and brutal action. There's a lot going on. It's both the things, and that issue 3 where you spin around the book was meant to be a big ray of light moment in terms of oh shit, this is what the book is. This is what we're doing right here, right?
Yeah.
So no, I'm thrilled to hear that it worked.
Yeah. Well, folks at home, if you'd like to let us know what you thought about this episode, if you've read Free Planet, for example, you could go to the email, skiffyandfanny@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from folks. If you're in the Discord already, you can also say stuff there. We have a bunch of different discussion channels for all kinds of stuff. The Skiffy and Fanny show is on most of the social sites that aren't run by totally evil people, mostly. Skiffy and Fanny, yeah, not really, but we had to level 10 we're out, but we have to work with level 8 and below. But the place to find that would be skiffyandfanny.com/skiffythings. And then we're live again every Friday, 7 p.m. Central on Twitch, which is twitch.tv/alphabetstreams for whatever we happen to be doing in a given week. And then again, patreon.com/skiffyandfanny. please support the show. And a real quick reminder, because I should remember to mention this to folks, that Locust Magazine is running their fundraiser at the moment. So please go support that. locustmag.com/ I think it's IGG26, if I've got the correct thing. But if you go to their socials on Blue Sky, etc., you can find that. And they have tons of perks. Please support it. Keep them alive, because they would review something like Free Planet. Just saying. Just saying.
Yeah. I would also like to thank our Patreon supporters. Andrea the Abiding. Has she changed it yet?
That is changed. It's correct now.
That's the new one. That's right. Yes, it is. Okay, I apologize. Andrea the Abiding, Cameron the Chthonic, Caroline the Benevolent, Carrie the Divine, Chris the Candescent, Daniel the Cultured, David the Debonair, JC the Jocular, Jeff the Gracious, Joseph the Jovial, Juan the Junctional, KB the Kind, Aaron the Kickass, At the Kinematic, Matthew the Magnificent,
and then Paul the Pious, Robin the Bold, Ryan the Resilient, Sarah A. the Sensational, Sarah E. the Sublime, Sarah O. the Rapturous, we need those other vowels, by the way, Scott the Gentleman, Stephen the Strange, Dan the Transient, Tari the Thorough, who's my mom, Tanya the Triumphant, Trish the Imperturbable, and Victor the Valiant. And if you want to find me, SeanDuke.net, just push /Duke things. I'm also on this Twitch thing doing streaming of games Wednesdays and Sundays at 6 p.m. Central.
I write monthly-ish comics and graphic novel reviews at skiffyandfanty.com, and you can find me on Blue Sky at stephengm.bsky.social, and of course Stephen is spelled with a PH, as is correct and proper.
All right, as required by the Skiffy and Fanny bylaws, I must make this hopeful when I end this episode, and so I will start by saying that there is a plethora of comic-related work that you can put into your eyeballs literally right now through this thing called the library. And so please join your local library. Get yourself a library card. I know that all of us are preferable. We want you to read like the physical, but digital also is okay. Go read everything you can and support those things, and make sure that your local library gets all the love that it deserves. And then when you have money, go buy delicious, beautiful, like things like this, like trade paperbacks and single issues. Support comic artists, because comics are awesome.
And in the meantime, if there's a book that you want to get, request it from the library, man. Request free play. I love when people tell me they read my books from a library. Honestly, I love it. I think it's great. I mean, like, not only like those sales. First of all, those sales count. One, and two, it exposes more people to the work, and that's really the goal. I do these things for people to read them, and so the more opportunities for people to actually read them, the better. So please, whether you can't afford it or just don't want to buy it, whatever, request Free Planet from the library. Please
do it
now.
Yeah. Not that.
You can go to the web. It doesn't matter if it's
hopeful ending and scene.